Welcome back to our channel where we provide updates and undisclosed narratives on the royal family. We provide you with the exciting news breaking Princess Anne forces emergency vote on Camilla's title Windsor in shock. A recent unprecedented incident within the British royal family focused on a reported intervention by Princess Anne, utilizing a seldom employed constitutional mechanism to initiate an emergency vote regarding Queen Camilla's role, and title serves as a case study in the intersection of personal loyalty, institutional authority, and constitutional procedure. This narrative systematically analyzes the triggering events, the archival and documentary resources that prompted action, the subsequent internal dynamics and conflicts, and the wider constitutional and socio-political ramifications that the experience may engender. The research contends that the episode transcended a mere familial dispute. Instead, it was a confrontation of conflicting interpretations of the Crown's integrity and destiny. This poses challenging considerations about authority legitimacy and how an institution used to deliberate secrecy reacts when private relationships and public obligations intersect. This analysis contextualizes the episode within a historical framework of monarchical crisis management and modern challenges, heightened media scrutiny, public demands for accountability, and intricate advisory networks aiming to elucidate how hereditary institutions manage instances where the symbolic and personal converge. Contextual background and constitutional framework. The monarchy of the United Kingdom functions under a hybrid constitutional framework that includes statutes, conventions, and a collection of unwritten norms. This hybridity has given the Crown significant flexibility. Several tasks are executed based on precedent rather than established regulations, facilitating adaptability, while also instilling ambiguity over the exact limits of power. Within this framework, there are processes that, albeit seldom used, serve as theoretical protections against acts or behaviors considered capable of causing long-term harm to the organization. A specific provision reported in various accounts from within the household authorizes a restricted gathering of senior family members and advisors, collaborating with the Privy Council or a related entity, to assemble and formally vote on matters concerning the dignity, continuity, and impartiality of the Crown. Historically, these procedures have served as tools of last resort, fundamentally necessary, although practically minor due to the requisite political daring and family discord for their implementation. This remarkable clause should be seen as integrated within a broader framework of monarchical protections. For ages, kings and their advisors have depended on informal methods, private advice, ministerial restraint, and negotiated resignations to address crises that jeopardize public prestige. Contemporary instances include subtle ministerial interventions during scandals, the restructuring of public responsibilities to maintain the facade of unity, and in more severe historical cases, regency arrangements or abdications that addressed institutional impasses. The system outlined in this episode functions as a formalized but little-used method for resolving disputes that cannot be managed via conventional home procedures. The remarkable characteristics of the described activation are hence dual in nature. The measure is seldom used. It mostly serves as a theoretical safeguard against institutional risk. The decision to use it converts a personal family matter into a fundamental constitutional problem. While ordinary conflicts may be resolved via negotiation and compromise, initiating a formal vote escalates the issue to a constitutional level, asserting that private actions possess public importance, warranting collective authoritative involvement. Reports from the royal household indicate that Princess Anne contemplated and allegedly asserted that the situation warranted the activation of this exceptional protection. The decision escalated a conflict with the behavior and position of a prominent royal official into an issue concerning the Crown's moral authority and ability to represent stable administration. Comprehending why a senior royal might activate such a mechanism necessitates an examination of the normative rationale that supports the Crown's longevity. The monarchy relies on a delicate balance of personal integrity, symbolic representation, and institutional stability. When any of these characteristics are thought to be endangered, particularly by individuals who regard themselves as guardians of tradition, the resort to extraordinary measures becomes not only plausible, but in their perspective, imperative. The remarkable activation of the Council should therefore be seen as a situation where custodial obligation surpassed the conflicting priorities of family discretion and reputational control. The catalyst, archival evidence, and its analysis. The immediate impetus for Princess Anne's claimed action was the re-emergence of a sealed envelope from the Royal Archives at Windsor, an item characterized by insiders as remarkable in origin and significance. The envelope, purportedly located in a restricted area accessible to a select few, had the wax seal and personal symbol of Queen Elizabeth II, an emblem traditionally reserved for items of significant importance. The letter differed in tone and intent from the intimate letters often linked to the late sovereign contemporary. Reports assert it was official, clear, and imbued with a sense of institutional urgency. The primary warning, designed to underscore the need of protecting the crown's dignity and to caution against those whose allegiance to the institution may conceal personal ambitions, was seen by readers as both prescriptive and diagnostic. This archive document served not just as a historical curiosity, but as a normative device that redefined contemporary behavioral norms. Archives in royal settings fulfill two functions. They act as warehouses of memory and tools for institutional continuity, while also representing procedural authority when referenced to validate current choices. The letter's rhetorical impact depended on the late monarch's moral authority. A caution presented as a warning from a long-reigning ruler had significant weight in a society that esteems continuity in tradition. Consequently, the reemergence of the document provided both a factual foundation and a moral justification for involvement. The receipt of the letter by Princess Anne prompted a reassessment of events and patterns that, when seen separately, were trivial or harmless. She is said to have re-examined a series of events, reassignments of responsibilities, the increasing prominence of advisors associated with the Queen Consort, and nuanced redistributions of ceremonial roles that collectively indicated to her a calculated consolidation of power surrounding the Queen Consort. The letter's phrasing offered an interpretive key. While previous observers may have seen ordinary administrative changes, Princess Anne now saw a cohesive plan to establish enduring authority for a specific person inside the monarchical framework. The archival document served as both evidence and moral justification. It demonstrated that the deceased sovereign had considered situations where allegiance to the institution should prevail over immediate personal connections, and it provided Princess Anne with a framework to evaluate recent actions. The letter was not just abstract in its discourse. Sources close to Princess Anne indicate that its wording prompted a particular investigation into the reassignment of responsibilities and the restructuring of advisory frameworks. Household observers identified a trend. Trusted advisors, historically responsible for briefing and guiding the sovereign, were increasingly reported to have private meetings with the Queen Consort. Invitations to representational events were being redirected, thereby shifting public perceptions of the central figures of royal authority. And philanthropic patronages and honors seemed to align with networks that subtly integrated institutional loyalty into personal allegiance. Although each alteration may have been justifiable individually, the aggregate impact prompted Princess Anne to determine that a deliberate and systematic expansion of control was occurring. The transition from seeing patterns to identifying institutional threats is significant. Archives provide a historiographical foundation for viewing behavior as either accidental or systematic. For guardians of institutional integrity, historical material may convert suspicion into tangible alarm. The letter served as a diagnostic instrument that clarified what had previously been seen as reasonable, although unclear modifications. The stakes were clarified if the crown's symbolic centrality were individualized in a manner that favored personal networks over institutional standards. The monarchy's ability to maintain impartial legitimacy would be jeopardized. The accusations subdued consolidation and institutional vulnerability. The accusations directed toward Queen Camilla, as conveyed by sources, were not characterized by overt plotting or openly confrontational tactics. Their focus was on a subtle and systematic augmentation of authority, implemented via soft power, the development of personal networks, the strategic redistribution of ceremonial roles, and the realignment of advisors. For those familiar with the monarchy's traditions, such actions were potentially detrimental, as they redirected influence from institutional standards to a personalized sphere. The accusation was not one of illegality or minor public misconduct, but rather a shift in the internal structure of power that might over time change the monarchy's direction and the messages it sent to the public. According to senior courtiers referenced in sources, this procedure included many vectors. The reassignment of representing responsibilities ostensibly rationalized by schedule or representational parity has in effect altered the perception of who embodies continuity and who is seen as the stabilizing influence in public life. The prominence of ceremonies reinforces public connections between the monarchy and national leadership. Hence, changes in visibility are significant. The incremental promotion of certain advisors, mostly characterized by their personal allegiance to the Queen Consort, modified the channels of information that influence high-level decision-making. Access to the sovereign and the kind of guidance offered may significantly affect both symbolic stance and influence on institutional agendas. Third patronage and charity affiliations were purportedly used judiciously to foster regional and institutional loyalties that may result in favorable public perception and eventually institutional safeguarding. A pivotal turning point, according to sources, was an administrative memorandum inadvertently sent to a staff member associated with Princess Anne. The memorandum, articulated in management terminology, delineated a structure designed to ensure the stability of the Queen Consort's position beyond short-term anticipations. Readers described its tone as administrative and its purpose as preventive. It implied intentional preparation to ensure the longevity of a certain function. The letter demonstrated not just a strategic assertion of power, but also a written intention to make that influence enduring. This artifact converted disputed perception into recorded purpose, so legitimizing a more forceful institutional action. The character of these allegations, soft power instead than explicit wrongdoing, situates the conflict within a unique moral framework. Institutions often react more vigorously to explicit violations of law or public ethics than to morally ambiguous patterns of influence. The choice to see network building and representational recalibration as equivalent to institutional risk embodies a certain understanding of monarchical legitimacy, one that prioritizes communal stewardship, consistent ceremonial performance, and the preservation of an impersonal crown. Those who dispute the claims may argue that adaptation and strategy realignment are essential for the survival of a dynamic organization. The argument revealed a division between traditional custodial standards and practical adjustments to modern demands. The confrontation, interpersonal dynamics, and societal ritual. A private dinner at Windsor aimed to demonstrating familial solidarity against external scrutiny, instead transformed into a showdown that exposed the issue in its entirety. The event, intended to be personal and meticulously controlled, became volatile. What began as a standard discussion of timetables allegedly intensified into a direct and confrontational dialogue. Princess Anne's allegation that Queen Camilla was seeking to subvert the legitimate boundaries of the crown for personal gain was spoken with composure but conveyed undeniable intensity. Queen Camilla's answer was not a definitive denial. Rather, she recontextualized the allegations to highlight her essential role and ability to stabilize the monarchy amid instability. The conversation centered on conflicting narratives, custodial responsibility, untainted by personal desire and stewardship, based on practical expertise and perseverance. The scenario exemplified the inherent difficulties within organizations when public symbolism and private relationships intersect. The king, overseeing the lunch, was said to waver his demeanor, illustrating the tension between love and constitutional duty. The etiquette violation caused by Princess Anne's sudden exit from the table, a move that in royal tradition signifies a strong protest, transformed personal alienation into a public indication that the home scene had been irreparably disrupted. In royal culture, decorum and ritual serve as means of expressing power. Hence, a disruption in performance indicates underlying institutional strain. That gesture initiated the activation of procedural procedures, resulting in the emergency assembly of the Privy Adjacent Council detailed in later publications. The transition from a private disagreement to an official process exemplifies a threshold effect when ceremonial violations become publicly recognizable and symbolically significant custodians may be driven to pursue constitutional remedies to reaffirm the institution's ability to resolve internal conflicts. The conflict at Windsor had a dual purpose. It constituted both an interpersonal fracture and a catalyst for institutional response. The king's quandary, conflicting responsibilities. The principal challenge facing the king was a conflict between personal allegiance and civic responsibility. He maintained a marital alliance with the queen consort, established over decades of mutual experience and public examination. Meanwhile, he fulfilled the constitutional duty to protect the crown as an institution that surpasses personal affiliations. Individuals in his inner circle conveyed profound distress defending his wife unconditionally, jeopardized his constitutional duty in favor of personal allegiance. Acquiescing to Princess Anne's intervention threatened personal estrangement and would indicate a readiness to prioritize institutional metrics over private fidelity. The king's discussions, as reported by aides, focused on numerous important factors. He acknowledged that public perception is often decisive. The preservation of legitimacy relies not only on legal power, but also on the persistent conviction among citizens and the foreign community that the crown transcends the discord of ordinary politics. He worried that overt family conflict may undermine that impression. Historical contemplation rooted in an education rich in constitutional memory bolstered his caution. Scandals that extended their visibility in the public domain have caused cumulative institutional harm that a solitary corrective statement cannot readily rectify. Historical royal crises, including abdications and marriage scandals of the 20th century, illustrate that harm to symbolic capital may have enduring and detrimental effects not just on personal reputations, but also on the stability of institutions. The situation was further complicated by the stance of the Prince and Princess of Wales. Their alleged affiliation with Princess Anne converted the family conflict into a strategic competition influenced by succession and institutional continuity factors. Their position indicated that the future guardians of monarchical legitimacy preferred procedural purity over personal affiliations. For the king, their alignment affected not just personal family dynamics, but also the future attitude of his successor to institutional preservation. The stakes were intergenerational. Decisions taken now would shape the normative expectations inherited and enforced by the subsequent sovereign. Given these constraints, the alternative of procedural delay, deferring the emergency vote to allow cooling and negotiation, was evaluated and ultimately deemed inadequate. Postponement risked conveying indecisiveness. Moreover, it may facilitate the entrenchment of the same patterns that Princess Anne opposed. The time aspect of the problem is essential in political and institutional crises. Timing may dictate whether intervention halts a detrimental course or is seen as opportunistic. Considering the court's awareness of public perception and the risk of swift reputational damage in a highly mediated environment, the decision favored prompt settlement, notwithstanding the associated human costs. Consequently, the king faced a limited array of options, each with significant, immediate, and enduring consequences. Public response and political consequences. Upon the public revelation of the dispute's outlines, whether via intentional disclosure or unintentional leakage, the national and international response was swift and contentious. The media portrayed the incident as a royal rebellion with political connotations and constitutional implications. Broadcast platforms and print media significantly engaged in research using historians, constitutional academics, and former palace insiders to assess events and forecast results. The intensity of coverage was heightened by social media as commentators, influencers, and everyday individuals rapidly divided into opposing factions. Polling data, which was early and variable, indicated a pronounced division. Proponents of Queen Camilla highlighted her extensive service and stabilizing impact, while advocates for Princess Anne referenced the maintenance of tradition and the late Queen's Council. The local response had an international aspect. In Commonwealth realms and other nations, where the British monarch has a symbolic role, political leaders and pundits have articulated concerns or inquiries on the implications for the overarching constitutional framework. In regions where republicanism was emerging, observers saw the conflict as a sign of institutional vulnerability. In political systems where the crown was still broadly esteemed, pundits regarded the incident as a measure of the monarchy's ability to adapt. The controversy extended beyond palace life, engaging in discussions of contemporary legitimacy, the significance of hereditary institutions in diverse society, and the strategies used to resolve reputational crises in prominent institutions. Former palace insiders significantly influenced the story. Their public contributions infused provenance and depth into communal comprehension, while prompting questions about secrecy, loyalty, and the transformation of private evidence into public domains. Isolated testimony combines confidential insights with contemporary objectives, producing both clarity and distortion. Protests outside royal homes arising in response to the announcement demonstrated the divided emotional investments of various socioeconomic groups. Law enforcement and palace security were compelled to address a progressively explosive public spectacle, illustrating that an internal family conflict may swiftly manifest and need public order interventions. The event rekindled discussions on constitutional transparency and the interplay between the monarchy and democratic institutions. Legislators and observers questioned whether current rules adequately govern the connections between private royal houses and public authority, especially when soft power consolidations would compromise the crown's symbolic neutrality. Opposition voices used the episode to reinvigorate discourse on Republican alternatives in certain domains. In contrast, proponents said that internal structures, such as an emergency council, showed the monarchy's ability to self-regulate and maintain stability. The dispute resonated across several levels of government and public consciousness: the emergency council and the ballot. The emergency council convened consisting of the king's senior blood royals and high-ranking constitutional experts under a procedure requiring stringent secrecy and compliance with traditional formalities. The room where discussions took place, as recounted by observers, was laden with symbolic significance. The artwork and architecture reflecting institutional continuity added a palpable seriousness to the proceedings. The regulations overseeing the procedure were clear. Attendees would listen, think, and make conclusive ballots without the option of abstention or later modification. This procedural formality fulfilled several purposes. Initially, it formalized adjudication, therefore creating a feeling of impersonal validity apart from family bias. Secondly, it condensed moral and political discourse into a confined arena where the seriousness of decisions could be duly recognized. Third, it established a structure designed to shield the choice from immediate political contention by grounding it in tradition and advice. The effectiveness of these roles in practice is crucial for evaluating the episode's wider implications. Princess Anne's address to the council was, according to sources, an exemplification of controlled eloquence. She characterized her participation not as a personal vengeance, but as a defense of the crown's integrity, recalling the late Queen's articulated concern that the monarchy must stay above the private accumulation of authority. She expressed a scenario whereby unrestrained personal accumulation would result in irrevocable harm to the institution's public reputation. Queen Camilla's answer, when allowed, was similarly tactical. She portrayed herself as an essential stabilizing force and dismissed the accusation that her activities amounted to a covert usurpation of power. The judgment to be given lies between these presentations. The voting procedure was conducted with ceremonial gravity. Every statement presented in order enhanced the perception that the chamber operated as a judicial forum. Upon the announcement of the tally, the stillness in the room and the demeanor of the participants reflected the significant mutual costs associated with the outcome, costs assessed not just in personal relationships, but also in the political and symbolic capital of the monarchy. The ruling, while its limited technical details, functioned as a public determination on permissible limits of influence and the power of custodial systems to uphold them. The legal structure of the council and its jurisdiction warrants scrutiny. Although it is not a court and lacks conventional legislative enforcement, the council's rulings are bolstered by tradition, the moral authority of its members, and the crown's power to effect personnel and representational modifications. The power is fundamentally performative. Enforcement relies on future compliance by individuals inside the palace and the public's recognition of the council's decision as genuine. The story therefore exemplifies both the limitations and advantages of non-legalized constitutional tools in a political system that values convention as highly as codified law. The aftermath, institutional repercussions, and human toll. The immediate aftermath of the vote created a series of cascading repercussions. Queen Camilla's exit from the council room, characterized as composed and determined, implied a sudden change in her status within the royal family. The declaration was both a public and personal injury for the king, marking a juncture when individual attachment and public duty became irreconcilable. Princess Anne's demeanor after the decision, while seemingly composed, reflected an acknowledgement that the preservation of institutional integrity had come at the cost of family discord. The Prince and Princess of Wales strategically assumed a public role to reinforce the monarchy's image and safeguard the succession from any disturbance. Their public performance aimed to express unity and purpose. Nevertheless, underneath the choreographed motions resided a recognition of the tenuous human ties that preserve institutions. The extensive palace community, including aides, advisors, and domestic staff, saw a reconfiguration of alignments and recalibration of loyalties due to the new regime. Jobs were transferred, briefings revised, and communication techniques revamped to re-establish a cohesive narrative. A further discovery revealed by a senior royal archivist altered the story and made Princess Anne's behavior explicable within a certain interpretative framework as inevitable. The archivist verified the presence of a sealed document bearing a last directive from the deceased queen. This directive, as reported by informed sources, delineated the sovereign's obligation as surpassing personal affiliations and authorized actions deemed necessary when the crown's integrity was believed to be at jeopardy. This file served as documented evidence supporting the interpretative framework through which Princess Anne analyzed the previous letter and current administrative trends. It provided a legal and ethical foundation for the assertion that institutional preservation may, under extraordinary circumstances, justify corrective actions. The revelation prompted more public discourse over the equilibrium between openness and archive secrecy. The public and media exhibited significant interest in the file's contents due to its implications for the council's legitimacy. Conversely, disclosing secret royal directives and confidential processes jeopardized the monarchy's status as a uniting symbol, perhaps rendering it subject to forensic examination. The archivist's affirmation thereby exacerbated the contradiction central to the episode. Tools intended to preserve the crown's integrity had, via their deployment, become instigators of a public trust crisis. The human costs transcended prominent events. Personnel and consultants allegedly encountered demoralization as allegiances were scrutinized and career trajectories reassessed. The psychological impact on family members already under great public scrutiny was severe. Alienation, animosity, and the deterioration of trust may last beyond official remedies. Institutions dependent on intricate networks of mutual responsibility may face enduring stagnation if significant disruptions are not meticulously addressed. Examination, institutional robustness, and the constraints of familial administration. The episode prompts a wider contemplation of the structural difficulties inherent to hereditary constitutional regimes. The monarchy's endurance largely depends on its skill in quietly managing human relationships, resolving problems privately, and distributing authority via established customs rather than overt displays of power. When private dispute resolution methods are ineffective, or when the stakes necessitate public action, the institution must decide between obfuscation and confrontation. The decision made in this episode, confrontation via established constitutional mechanisms, prioritized the crown's enduring credibility above immediate family concord. This prioritization prompts normative inquiries on the thresholds that warrant extraordinary measures. The historical records referenced by Princess Anne and the recorded administrative practices provide a procedural and factual foundation for invoking a seldom-used procedure. The activation of such a mechanism reveals the monarchy's vulnerability to contestation, indicating that the crown is not insulated from domestic politics and that its protectors may sometimes act in ways that seem contrary to the principles of unity and continuity. The public responds to these instances in ways that mirror current ideals and concerns on accountability, equity, and the legitimacy of inherited power. The episode elucidates how organizations reliant on symbolic legitimacy face enforcement challenges. In democracies, formal legal frameworks provide avenues for redress and adjudication. Conversely, the monarchy's adjudicative authority is mostly internal and based on reputation. This systemic disparity limits treatments and may encourage protective secrecy. However, opacity may transform into a liability in an age characterized by increased public demand for openness. The dichotomy is pronounced. Institutional robustness sometimes necessitates discretion, while discretion fosters skepticism when juxtaposed with democratic principles of accountability. There are ramifications for constitutional convention. The implementation of an antiquated protection indicates that unwritten traditions has lingering influence. However, its implementation may incite demands for formalization. Discussions may arise over the need of codifying certain processes to provide clarity and to avoid the ad hoc use of extreme measures. Formalization, however, may jeopardize flexibility and may generate counterproductive incentives. The experience necessitates a meticulous reevaluation of doctrine, how to maintain adaptive capability while protecting against capricious exertions of influence. Comparative reflections elucidate alternate trajectories. Other monarchs and hereditary organizations have faced same challenges. Private behavior of royals inciting public controversy, or the rise of powerful consorts altering informal authority. Responses have differed. Some systems have depended on legal penalties or legislative oversight. Others have used negotiated agreements and strategic public communications. The British situation is unique due to its profound symbolic significance, international prominence, and close association with national identity. Hence, the stakes are heightened and the margin for mistake reduced. Pragmatic lessons for the Crown arise. Enhancing transparent advisory protocols and documenting representative distributions may reduce uncertainty about administrative intentions. Secondly, elucidating archive access and the conditions under which sealed materials may be used should safeguard both the integrity of legal advice and the institution against sporadic exploitation of private papers. Third, investing in internal dispute resolution processes with external legitimacy, potentially employing retired senior statespersons or independent arbiters, could provide legitimate venues for adjudication without resorting to dramatic counsels that may attract public attention. Ultimately, proactive public communication tactics that elucidate institutional measures without disclosing superfluous private information might alleviate reputational harm while maintaining confidentiality when warranted. Final assessment. The circumstances around Princess Anne's invocation of a rare constitutional protection and the ensuing emergency council decision on Queen Camilla's title signify more than just resolving an internal conflict. This was a pivotal instance in which the monarchy's ability to balance personal connections with public duties was scrutinized. Archival data and current administrative practices established the factual foundation for a robust institutional reaction. The emotional and political repercussions have prompted deep contemplation over the essence of royal power in the 21st century. The impact of the judgment on the monarchy's strength will depend on the institution's future handling of the human and symbolic aspects of the situation. In the immediate term, repercussions are evident. Family relationships have been strained, public sentiment has been polarized, and the palace's internal operations have been subjected to rigorous examination. In the long run, this experience will likely establish a precedent for the evaluation and management of future existential risks, influencing public expectations for the openness and accountability of an institution situated at the convergence of history, symbolism, and governance. The disclosed challenge is not amenable to straightforward solutions. It requires continuous evaluation of the equilibrium between personal allegiance and civic responsibility, the suitable extent of archive jurisdiction, and the criteria that should activate exceptional constitutional actions. For an institution whose legitimacy is largely based on perception and trust, the true challenge will be whether the Crown can reestablish a narrative of service and continuity that addresses the recent disruption without making itself continually susceptible to the exploitation of personal grievances. Reformist tendencies and protective instincts may provide limited solutions. The greater challenge is in creating sustainable frameworks that balance the Crown's need for discretion with democratic principles of accountability. Ultimately, the story brings to light a challenging question: how can a hereditary institution rejuvenate its moral authority when that authority must at times be safeguarded against those closest to it? The response will influence not just the immediate destiny of the people concerned, but also the overall sustainability of the monarchy as a lasting public institution. Should the Crown convert this crisis into an opportunity for subtle institutional adjustment, clarifying protocols, enhancing transparent governance, and mending interpersonal relationships, it may regain enhanced moral authority. If it continues to be ensnared in cycles of secrecy and conflict, the repercussions will extend beyond individual players to undermine the symbolic basis of the monarchy. The story serves as a cautionary narrative on the delicate balance between personal loyalty and civic responsibility within a constitutional framework that necessitates continual negotiation between tradition and change. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe, and share it.